Hello and welcome to the Cinema ATL Podcast. The Cinema ATL Podcast is a weekly podcast that examines the world of entertainment through the lens of local ANA filmmakers. That would be us, your hosts. I'm Michael D. Friedman, and that is
Martin Kelly.
And this week we talk with John Pruner, the host of the Bionic Frankenplot Podcast, which we were lucky enough to participate in. John is a local filmmaker, has worked on film, TV, and commercials for over 20 years. We'll find out more about his podcast and discuss other filmmaking topics with him. But first, Martin, why don't you tell our listeners how they can help us out?
Well, they can help us out by listening like they're doing right now, and also comment and rate this wherever you're listening. Subscribe there too. So where can you listen? Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Amazon Podcasts, and of course, many more.
And we also want to hear from you. You can always tweet us at CinemaATL or at my personal Twitter account, which is at Badger33.
Or hit me up at Marte_real1.
And of course, we're really digging into the Instagram account at CinemaATL Podcast, so please follow us there as well.
And of course, our legacy site, cinemaatl.com.
Well, all right, that's enough about our podcast. Let's talk about John's podcast, the Bionic Frankenplot Podcast. So, John Pruner is a local filmmaker from Atlanta who has started his own podcast called the Bionic Frankenplot Podcast. And we've asked him here today to talk about the podcast and some other things. So, John, welcome to the Cinema ATL Podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. So just so, our listeners can learn a little bit about you, why don't you tell us like kind of your background and what you've been up to?
How far back do you want to go?
1987.
Yes, that's a good place to start.
I'll do the short and sweet version. I started doing theater when I was a teenager, went to college for theater, thought I was going to be an actor, became a writer instead and a director. After I got out of college, I found out that knowing Shakespeare doesn't really get you money. So I built sets for the Alliance for a while, and then I bounced around town. And then I fell in with a group of filmmakers called Dailies back in 2006, 7. It was like Dave Bruckner.
Yeah. I'm saying you don't have to be specific about the date.
Sure.
Just back then.
Sure. Back in the day when I was a young lad. But Dailies consisted of like Dave Bruckner, Dan Bush, Victoria Warren, Linda Burns, whole bunch of like mainstay people in the Atlanta film scene. And I kind of started learning filmmaking that way, and then eventually fell into camera work quite by accident. And that's kind of where I've stayed ever since. And now I'm a camera operator and a director of photography, and also a screenwriter.
Well, I do remember, and before we get to the next question, I do remember working with you in those days. One time I was producing a segment of a feature film, and got to work with you as a cinematographer, and that was a very interesting experience. If you remember, I don't know if you do, but yeah, I definitely remember those days, and it's very cool that you've been able to keep it up. That's one of the things that people don't do a lot of, is keep it up.
Was this with Kelly McClung?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. I was so rubbish back then.
You were fine. You were fine for what we were doing at that point. And again, it was kind of a situation where I was involved in part of the production, not the whole production, but we were doing sort of the end of it. But that was the first time I met you, and I've always liked you. So thanks for coming on today again. And why don't you talk about the Bionic Frankenplot Podcast? I mean, how does this thing work?
So first of all, I just want to say I've always liked you as well, Martin. I've appreciated everything.
He's okay. He's just all right.
I just want to say I appreciate everything you've done with the Atlanta Screenwriters Group, you and Femi, and Mike. I don't know you that well, but I assume that we'll be fast friends and we'll be friends forever after this.
Yes. Contrary to Mike's opinion of me, I've always liked Mike too.
The Bionic Frankenplot podcast is a podcast where each episode I bring in guests. My guests come in. They each submit 5 movie titles, and I put them all into a hat, and then we draw 2, and that becomes the basis of a new plot that we're going to create together. And we roll a 20-sided die to figure out the genre, and then we roll a 6-sided die to decide the number of characters. So, for instance, like if I drew Jaws and Mr. Holland's Opus, it would be we're going to make a movie that's Jaws meets Mr. Holland's Opus as a musical with 4 characters. And then we have an hour to kind of bust that story. And for good or for ill, sometimes it'll go off the rails, sometimes it won't. Sometimes we come up with something absolutely fantastic. It's always kind of a pleasant surprise where we end up at the end of the episode.
Yeah, well, Martin and I had the opportunity to partake in an episode, and so if you guys haven't checked it out, then go look at the Bionic Frankenplot podcast. Like, do a search on any of your podcasting platforms and take a look at our episode. But it was a lot of fun and really enjoyed it. How did you come up with this idea to do a podcast based around this?
Short answer is depression.
Okay.
The long answer is I was going through a depression. So being a filmmaker, work is kind of cyclical. You know, there are fallow times. There are times where you're working all the time, and you kind of fall into this cycle of feast or famine. And I was in a famine phase of the year. And when that happens, I tend to get a little depressed because I kind of like, for good or for ill, I kind of base my value on my output and staying creative. And one of the things that I do to kind of like cope is I lay on the couch and I watch video game speed running. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but video game speed running is where a player will take a game and try to get through it as quickly as possible, even breaking the game to its very core just to do it. So, for instance, like the world record of someone going through Super Mario Brothers 1 is 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Like, that's how fast you can get through that game.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I find it really fascinating because they have this thing called RNG, which is random number generation. And if you're playing a speed run and you're going for a world record and you get bad RNG, it'll completely screw up your entire run and you'll have to start over. And so I started thinking about how would it be interesting to take that idea of RNG and put it into filmmaking and see what I could come up with. And so it kind of falls in line with what is it? I forgot. What is it? The 12 instructions? What was it? The 12 instructions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 12 instructions.
So what they did with the 12 instructions, but just kind of randomized. And so I kind of started coming up with this idea of like, oh, what if we do this? What if we do this? And I started bouncing the idea off of my wife and my friends, and everybody seemed pretty interested in it. And that's kind of how that's my litmus test as to an idea if it has legs or not. So like when I'm starting to write a story, I'll pitch the idea to like 5 of my most trusted friends. They'll be like, oh, that sucks. And I'm like, okay, well, back to the drawing board. And this podcast idea kind of had legs. And so I invested the money in the equipment and sat down and recorded the first 2 episodes. And then immediately afterwards, the pandemic hit and the quarantine came down and it put a stop to everything creative.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I actually, I think it reminds me a little bit of, in just a slight way of when we would work on a 48-hour film in some ways, is in the kind of spontaneous creation that you have to do with that, you know what I mean? And come up with these ideas for stories. And what I don't understand is how well you're able to sort of corral this 3-ring circus or 4-ring circus in some cases. You know what I mean? Because I know that that when we did it, we were going all over the place, and it was a lot of fun. But you were able to sort of keep us on task and get us to where we needed to go. So that was pretty impressive.
It's I kind of see myself as a referee. My first couple episodes, we actually had 8 or 9 people, and let me tell you, editing that all down into a cohesive episode was a pain in the butt, for sure.
I can imagine.
As time goes on, it's like my goal in recording these episodes is, one, to talk the least amount as possible because I hate my own voice. And two, just kind of keep everybody in a certain lane, I guess, like allow people the freedom to create and to riff and everything. But keeping the time limit is, I think, the best thing, because I'll keep an eye on the time. And if we get to like half an hour and we're still talking about like characters and what these characters should be, which actually kind of happened in the episode that we all recorded together, is that we hit the half hour mark and we were still talking about like what the characters' names were. And I was like, all right, guys, I gotta hurry up. We got what's happening in the first act.
Yeah, sometimes we're just too creative for our own good, I think, just trying to like come up with the perfect protagonist. And
oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, the thing I also love about this podcast is that perfection is the enemy of creativity. Right. Is that you get so bogged down in like trying to make everything just as precise as you can, that you kind of lose the forest for the trees. And honestly, like, an ulterior motive to this podcast is I get to practice pitching, which everybody's kind of bad at until they've done it for a long time. And so like with this, it's like being able to like come up with a concept on the fly sort of thing. Like, I've talked to my friend Dave Bruckner, who is a very successful horror director, and he's talked about being in the room pitching an idea, and he'll spend like half an hour pitching the idea, and then there'll be dead silence, and somebody will go, "What else you got?"
Right.
And so you literally have to pull something out of your ass. And so this, I think, is good practice for that.
Right.
No, I think that's a smart point for sure, and that is definitely how pitching is. So, what do you enjoy most about hosting the podcast? I mean, we talked a lot about it, but what's your most satisfaction in hosting it?
I love listening to people who are smarter than me come up with a story. Then
you were disappointed with our episode.
Then why'd you ask us?
I respect you guys as artists, and I really love what you guys came up with, especially with Chris in the mix. Like, I love having Chris Chambers on in any project that I can, because he's just his perspective is so left of field sometimes that it causes me to kind of whip my head around and go, "Oh yeah, we're totally looking at it from a different angle now."
Yeah.
And honestly, this was a big ruse to just hang out with people, because I'm terrible at networking, and all my friends are set friends, and I only see them once or twice a year. And so this was kind of just an excuse to be like, hey, let's get together, let's record a podcast, let's hang out and have a couple of drinks, And thank you, COVID has put a real wrench in that whole plan.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. It's funny, you mentioned that, like, set friends. I mean, one of my favorite things is being on a set, and of course, we haven't been on a set for a long time, and it's like the instinct is, if we like hanging out on the set with our friends so much, let's just have a barbecue. But we can't have a barbecue, even.
Yeah.
You can have a virtual barbecue.
Yeah, we have that.
Well, a funny story about a set friend is I made a set friend on a VH1 job that I worked on for a month and a half, and he and I became very close friends. And we went to breakfast every single day. We went to work. We rode to set together. We came home to the hotel together. We played Nintendo together. It was great. And then afterwards, didn't hear from him for 3 years. And then he calls me up and he's like, "Hey, I've moved to Atlanta. Are you still here?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I'm still here. I'm stuck here." That's the weird reality of working in production, is that you can be best buddies with somebody and not see them for a very long time.
Totally. No, definitely. I mean, I get that a lot actually. Some of the people I enjoy spending the most time with, I only see them when we're doing a movie.
So you mentioned, how COVID put a wrench in your plans, and not just of the podcast, but other things as well. And how do you manage to stay creative like during these times? Do you do anything to try to fight that depression that you might have from not being on set?
hmm well, in this just in the specific case of COVID, I went through all the through all the motions of panic. So I had my first bona fide panic attack, but in March of 2020. That was interesting. I felt like I was going
Mhm.
to die. And then after that, I kind of like dusted myself off, picked myself up, and started to figure out ways to kind of cope with everything that was happening. And one of the things that I did was I tried to get myself into a routine. I tried to not stay up so late, not get up early, and try not to doom scroll all the time.
Right,
And
right.
then the biggest thing I did was I finally sat down and I wrote a couple of screenplays that I had batting around in my head for the better part of 8 or 9 years. And so I ended up writing a full sci-fi feature that I'm trying to get funded now. If anybody wants to fund a $2 million feature about time travel, that'd be great. And then I wrote a 1 hour spec pilot that's kind of similar to the boys, but I think different enough.
Right.
So, and that ended up being, let's see, combined total of all the drafts, I would say probably about 500 pages written in about
Wow.
2.5 months.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, yeah. But here's the flip side of that. It took me 9 years to get to this point, and it took a pandemic to get me to this point, and it took me a panic attack to get me to this point.
Right.
Right.
So,
Well, I mean, I still have like, I think Martin and I were talking the other day. I still have like probably like 40, 13-page scripts lying around that I've
mhm.
never got to. So it is impressive that you were able to do that. How did you motivate yourself to do that? I mean, like you mentioned, trying to, keep a time period where you're not staying up too late, getting up at a right time. Is there any other kind of things that you worked on?
um, exercise helps me a
Right.
lot. It helps me regulate because I have this, like, for me, if I don't try to keep myself accountable, I'll just kind of end up bouncing off the walls until I fall asleep at like 3 in the morning,
Mhm.
sort of thing. So, like, for me, exercise helps get that nervous energy out. And also, just like listening to music and just zoning out and listening to music helps me kind of like stay mellow. And then also, kind of stirs the creative juices a little bit. So I'll be listening to music and I'll get an idea and I'll just have my Evernote out on my phone and just write down whatever idea I have in my head. And then I'll come back to it like a day later or so and be like, oh, that was kind of a cool idea. Oh, this was a terrible idea. So, and I
Right.
and I think the podcast started as one of those ideas actually.
Well, I mean, listening to music, actively listening to music is kind of a lost art these days. I feel like it's like people only listen while they're doing something else. So to be able
hmm
to, just enjoy some music and focus on that, and then, like you said, clear your head is actually does lead to inspiration. And Martin and I talked about ways to keep writing and stuff like that in a previous podcast, and we did mention exercise as well. Sometimes I find my biggest inspiration while I'm out jogging, just because you're not really focused on anything else and your mind gets to
hmm
wander a little bit, so it's got that benefit as
hmm
well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
For about 5 or 6 years, I practiced martial arts. And because of COVID and stuff, I had to stop it, and I haven't trained in like over a year now. And I recently just started working with a personal trainer, and that's been really great, but also really rough because I'm 38 now and I don't move so well. um, but I enjoy getting my ass kicked every 3 days a week. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that is an important thing for people to kind of keep what a lot of things you mentioned, keep routine, and keep
Hmm.
exercising, and especially me and Mike definitely swear by the exercise because it does help kind of clear the mind of everything else that's going on, and allows you to sort of think creatively, and I do get a lot of inspiration from my exercise, and other and music too, because music is certainly something that's been important in my life, and I've kind of rediscovered music uh, a lot
Hmm.
during this time.
Yeah, very much. So I a couple of years ago I started collecting vinyl, and that's become a pretty full-fledged hobby for me now. Like for instance, last year alone I bought 22 vinyl albums, and I really enjoy the ritual of it. I love sitting down, having a cup of tea or something, and putting on an album and laying on the floor and just letting the sonicascape wash over me and just allow me to kind of get away for a little while and get outside of myself, which
Right.
is a huge problem for us as writers because we let ourselves get in the way too much,
Definitely.
especially in like the early drafts, especially because it's this whole like, oh my god, the blank page, what do I put on it, is this any good, blah 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 blah. Like I hate first drafts, I hate second drafts too. It's by like the fifth or sixth draft that I start feeling kind of comfortable in what I'm actually doing, and looking at it and going, oh, this is not total crap.
Right.
Well, yeah, that's that exactly, and we touched on it earlier. In your discussion earlier, is like the podcast is a great way to sort of free yourself to just let ideas flow and give yourself
Yeah.
permission to just say whatever. And I think as writers, we
Mhm.
don't do that enough. We don't let ourselves go enough. You know what I mean? We get too bogged down in all the minutia of what we feel like writing should be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because we get in our brains. We have these stakes in our head of like, this has to be good. It has to sell. It has to please people. And that's what I love about the podcast is that there are no stakes. Like for good or for ill, like in an hour, this thing's going to be over. And the thing is, like, if you have nothing to contribute, there are two or three other people there who will pick up the slack and keep the ball kicking the ball down the hill.
Yeah,
Well, that's
definitely.
what I was going to
But
say about what I enjoyed about the podcast was that feeling of collaboration um, in this environment. It's really fun to actually p- bounce ideas back and forth. And I think that some people that are
Mhm.
writing and only writing by themselves don't really experience that collaboration. And it was just really fun to experience that again. I haven't done that in a while, so
Thank you. I think something that makes my experience of writing unique is that I come from a pretty strong theater background. And in theater, you workshop a piece to basically to death
yeah,
until everybody's satisfied with it. So like you write a draft, you give it to actors, they read through it, and you find where the holes are. And I feel like that experience is something that's really needed in screenwriting because I feel like in screenwriting it's such a lonely profession that we have no choice but to get lost in our own heads. So when I finally get a first draft down that I kind of like, I will send it out to five or six people that I trust and let them read it. And then based on the feedback, like I'll get feedback back from people, and if I see feedback that's lining up with each other, then I'll be like, "Oh, those are the things I need to change," or "Oh, those are the opinions of the people that I don't need to listen to right now." Because I know that two drafts later, this is going to be fixed.
yeah,
right, right. No, and I think you're right about that, and that's one thing that we always have tried to do in the past with the Atlanta Screenwriters Group is a little bit of fellowship for writers, right, and also B,
Hmm.
to have a sounding board, in a workshop almost environment for this kind of thing to sort of help people along in the journey.
Hmm. And it's super hard to bring your work to something like that because I went to a few of those meetings, and sometimes the feedback was great and sometimes the feedback was not. And you could definitely tell that like the person standing up and telling you that your screenplay sucks, they were basically just projecting stuff about their own work. And you're
yeah.
like, okay, buddy, cool. I'm just gonna draw this sailboat on this piece of paper and act like I'm taking a note.
True.
Yeah, I
True.
mean,
Well,
it is definitely a mixed bag. I mean, I used to be regular attendee at the Atlanta Screenwriters Group as well, and you when you go enough, you learn whose opinions
Mhm.
you agree with. I mean, you don't need to agree with somebody, but whose opinions you value more than others. And
Mhm.
a lot of times it comes out, when some people have something to say, they might not be. It all goes back to like being familiar with the people that you're opening your work up to. So, whether or not you're going to the Atlanta Screenwriters Group where you're putting out in front of
Mhm.
probably more people, or doing it with, 5 or 6 of your closest friends, it is important to get that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a crucial step in the path of creating anything really, like from writing on up to, a finished product, is that having someone there to look at your work and go, uh, who's not there to destroy it, but there to critique it in a positive way to get it to the finish line. I think that's a crucial step in the process. I mean, hell, look at George Lucas. Like the original Star Wars movies, he had people telling him no left and right all the time, and we got the Star Wars movies. And then when he finally got rid of all those no men and then was surrounded by yes men, we got the prequels,
yeah, true.
which
That's true.
which on hindsight is they're kind of brilliant in their own way, honestly. Um, if not completely flawed, but that's another story for another time.
We might have to discuss that because that's a topic that we could go into depth on. But yeah,
Oh, dude, let me tell you what. There's a sequence in Revenge of the Sith that is just amazing, and in 3 scenes it tells you everything you need to know about uh, Anakin Skywalker and his turn to the dark side, and it's amazing. And one day I want to sit down and talk to people about it because it's incredible.
well, we
Anyway,
might need to
moving
we
on.
might need to do that as a upcoming podcast. I'd be interested to discuss that myself because I don't know if I can get much redeeming value out of much of the prequels at all. But
I definitely love to hear. I definitely love to hear your thoughts on that at some point. So maybe we will get back together because Mike and I are huge Star Wars fans. So we are critical of the prequels though, for
Cool.
sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
all right. Well, I think we're running low on time, so we're gonna enter the lightning round here.
All right,
I
perfect.
got 5 questions for you. Just try to answer them as first thing that comes to mind, just like your podcast. Don't let reality get in the way.
Cool.
All right. Number 1, favorite film.
Back to the Future. Perfect movie, perfect
All right.
script,
Yeah,
perfect
it's really
casting, perfect everything, and it's perfect by accident.
good. All right. Number 2, favorite director.
Oh shit, Edgar Wright.
Oh,
Oh,
I
nice,
like that
nice
choice.
choice.
Yes,
Nice
dude.
choice.
I can sit down and watch Scott Pilgrim versus the World at any
Oh yeah,
time.
great
It's an
film.
incredible movie.
I
Great film.
definitely, yeah. I mean, Mike and I are definitely big fans. So good answer.
All right. Number 3, popcorn or candy.
Butterfingers all the way, baby.
Yep. Better not lay your finger on my Butterfinger, but yes.
Exactly. However, those times when you get the Butterfinger box and you get into the movie theater and you open it up and you take the first bite and you realize that all the Butterfingers are stale.
Oh yeah,
That
no,
Oh
no,
is
no.
yes, that's
that is
awful.
torture.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Number 4, Terminator franchise or Aliens franchise.
Shit. Um. Uh, Character wise, Terminator, of course. Love the characters, love the lighting in those movies. But cinematography wise, Aliens all the way. As a cameraman, Alien.
Does that include? I just want to ask. Does that include the Ridley Scott movies too?
You mean like Prometheus and stuff?
Yes.
So let me clarify. The first 2 Alien movies.
First 2. Number 3's got some pretty good cinematography. I know a lot of people don't like number 3, but
I kind of
Fincher is
dig
pretty
number
good.
3.
Yeah, I
It's
kind of like it
interesting.
too.
They last year, what was it, a couple of years ago, they came out with a graphic novel of the original Alien 3 script that
Oh
I have
wow.
yet to read.
Yeah, I'll have to
Yeah,
take a
so
look at that.
yeah, anyway.
All right, number 5. Favorite Atlanta movie theater. Where would you go see a movie if you could?
I'm really partial to the Terra.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Okay.
I in the small town in which I grew up, I had a one screen theater in our town, and it was this small little place with the not what is it called, the rake seating and
Mhm.
the comfy chairs and stuff like that, and that feeling is, to me, that encapsulates my experience of cinema, is that little theater where my dad took me to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when I was like 8. And then ironically, the last movie I ever saw in that theater was Last Action Hero, which is a movie about the death of cinema.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
So, and the Terra for me evokes that feeling. I mean, Plaza's great, Midtown Art's great. They're all great, but I don't know. I just get fuzzy feelings when I go to the Terra. Like, I saw Once there with my wife, and
Oh,
then I saw
yes.
I saw Whiplash there with a group of friends, and these were movies that I knew very little about and went in and was blown away. And I think that really speaks to the strength of the experience of those particular films.
Well, definitely, yeah, definitely. Once is a fantastic film. We just talked about that recently on our podcast. But yeah, the Terra is a great theater. I agree with you.
Well, all right. We're reached our time, but John, thank you so much for joining us for this podcast. How can people follow you and how can they listen to the podcast?
So you can find the Bionic Frankenplot podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Pandora, and a couple of other places. I'm not sure where else, but basically anywhere you get your podcast fix. Um, you can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Just type in my name as one word, and I'm bound to pop up. I'm most active on Instagram. I kind of hate Facebook. And then I just spend most of my time on Reddit looking at Wall Street bets.
Get that AMC stock, huh? Right.
Yeah. Oh, God. I bought it at the wrong time. Let me tell you what, fellas. Wrong time.
Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back soon to talk about that Star Wars theory you got there. I'd like to hear it.
Love it. I would love it. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, take it easy.
So thank you for listening, everybody. We encourage you to check out the Bionic Frankenplot podcast on podcast platforms throughout the world, including Spotify and all the other ones he mentioned. And check out our episode if you want to find out how we meld the Mighty Ducks with Johnny Mnemonic, two of the greatest movies ever created.
According to some. According to some.
But yeah, so thanks again for joining us. Remind you to please comment, rate, share, subscribe, all those cool things. And once again, we want to thank Eureka Failure and Chris Chambers, who joined us on the podcast, for providing the music as they do each and every week. Check them out at eurekafailure.bandcamp.com. And Martin, what words of wisdom do you have to share with us this week?
This week, same as always. Keep your head up and keep on plugging.
One week you got to surprise me and just be like, burn the world down or something like that. I don't know.
Maybe I'll go dark one time.
But yeah, thanks again, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Have a good one.